really want to take us to is talking about the driving forces for change. And this turned into a presentation I gave to the forecasting group that I've been going to for years and speaking at for years in Milan in last May. And it was at the Politecnico di Milano, the forecasting workshop. And basically I was telling them basically what the key technology drivers were and what that meant for forecasting, technology forecasting. I gave some examples of forecasts. We don't have time to talk about forecasting, so I'll drop that part out, but I'll give you sort of a synopsis of that. This is what a bunch of forecasters look like when we're in your place. So that's me in Milan listening to another forecaster talk about forecasting. Actually, the presentation that I'll be giving now is more closer to a shorter version that I gave in Spain at a larger conference in June. First thing is, back when I started forecasting in the really early 80s and into the 90s, we detected that there were like about 10 really major driving forces that were changing things and would change things. And for the sake of time, I've reduced this down to 4. These driving forces are still with us, but they're 20 years old now, so they're still driving things, but they're not maybe as strong as they were before, partly because they succeeded. One is just physical movement being replaced by telecommunications. Another is analog being replaced by digital. Another is low bandwidth being replaced by high bandwidth. Another is wireless being replaced by wireline. You can think about all the examples of that, but just to give one, if I look out at you guys and take a photo, I'm really doing all these things. Because I'm going to send it, I can send it to all of y'all, I can send it back to TFI. That would be physical movement being replaced by telecommunications. In fact, I don't have to go to the drugstore to have it develop anymore, so that's the same thing. It's also totally digital instead of analog. At the start of this revolution, I would have taken a film picture, right? Analog, now it's digital. It's also, I don't know how many megapixels that will be on that picture I just took, but it's a lot of pixels compared to, so if we sent it even electronically back in the 80s, it would have been on a 300 baud modem and probably taken a week to send. And then it's definitely wireline instead of wireless, because if we had sent it electronically back in the 80s, I would have dialed a telephone, I would have put the telephone onto a acoustic coupler, and that would have gone on the analog, on an analog voice call to get there. So this revolution has basically already happened and is partly there. The reason I mention all this is that by knowing these drivers and really understanding them, we were able to make some fantastic forecasts. We made some of the first forecasts in wireless that actually said that wireless would compete with wireline and that we would be using these guys instead of landline phones. It helped us make the first forecast of the peak in wireline access lines. It let us make forecasts in everything from sending images to interconnecting LANs to advanced television. And so we were able to make some of the first really good high definition TV forecasts. We made broadband forecasts well before it even started. By knowing those drivers, we were able to do a lot. And we've been riding on that, TFI has, and in our forecasting work, has been riding on that wave pretty much for just early 80s, late 80s till 2000, well into 2000. So we could. And I've always thought, well, this is kind of boring once we've ridden that wave. Surely everything's been invented by now. Well, no. Now we're starting another wave that's probably even bigger than that last wave that swept everything away that we knew. And again, there's a bunch of them, and I identified the 4 of the most important ones here. And we don't have time to talk about them all in this session. We'll get back to it as the program continues. But I'll say a few things about them. But anyway, the top 4 are humans being replaced by machines, slow data, I'll say slow big data, moving to fast big data. and since I won't say anything else about that, I'll just refer back to what I said last year. It's basically, the model now is you gather a bunch of data, you store it in a big data farm somewhere, and then you analyze it. And that by analyzing it using big data techniques, you get all sorts of information. With fast data, you collect the data, you act on it right away, and then you store it away for future use. And so you're doing actionable things with that data. The next one is people communicating, going from that to things communicating being a big part of communications. IoT is a huge example of that. And then lastly, regular computing getting replaced by cognitive computing, or more generally, artificial intelligence becoming more and more a part of our lives. These things are highly interconnected, as you might guess, but they're interesting each in their own. I'll just say a few words about humans to machines. Here we're talking about robots, self-driving vehicles or autonomous vehicles, and drones would be three major examples. And I always think about the robots as being, that kind of thing, but actually there are lots of robots that you wouldn't really guess were robots. There's large agricultural robots of all different types. We have rescue robots. The tragedy up in Dallas ended with a robot, right? Military robots, of course. I like the ones with legs for some reason. And then we have medical robots. And then this has been out for a couple of years, but telepresence robots, where instead of the camera being in one place and you have to pre-decide where the camera goes, the camera is under your control, so it can drive down the aisle here and focus on Robert and let Robert talk to his people back home without Robert having to hold the camera up in front of himself. So it's interesting there. Going back to the last point, cognitive versus computing going to cognitive. Basically, when we talk about cognitive computing, we're basically saying we're referring to systems that both learn and interact with humans in their natural way. So that they not only are smart, but they also can learn and interact. They can take input in, sensors in, they can work it, and then they, in a human way, can affect the world outwardly, which is not the way we've typically dealt with computers, except in science fiction, of course. And the tools in cognitive computing are, again, the artificial intelligence. It's machine learning, it's data mining, pattern recognition, natural language programming. It's been around for a while, but keeps getting better, and of course, as computers get faster, they become more important. Just to give an example of one of these, there's an area called cognitive assistance. I found this a meeting of the National Science Foundation just this year, in 2016, on cognitive assistance. And I just pulled a few of the highlights from their talk. First thing they said is they reached a consensus that cognitive assistance should complement rather than replace human capabilities. This is the same thing IBM says about their cognitive intelligence. And I think, oh, that sounds good. How much is, whether it's true or not, I don't know. They mentioned three scenarios: education, group work, and elder care, which we'll talk about elder care in a second. And they acknowledge that these things incorporate complex social environments and require interdisciplinary research. Fair enough. And then they say there's a very high likelihood that some of the most historically significant 21st century struggles will be over the control of such intelligence assistance systems and the data that is used to teach them. Struggles between individuals, corporations, and governments. Wow. And then they say that because of that, there needs to be public-private partnerships between government and industry and so forth, and academia, of course. So let me give you an example of what one of these might look like. This is from a group in Germany called Cognit that's designing these things for people with dementia, Alzheimer's patients, basically. And so this is Cognit over here, just so you know. That's the robot. That's the breakfast table, so it's kind of sets the scene for you. And basically, Cognit basically analyzes speech. I mean, he has some wearable glasses, as you'll see in a minute. He analyzes, the graphics, the pictures it takes. It recognizes gestures. It recognizes facial expressions and body language. It sees physical action, and actually, like lots of things, it looks at the biometrics of your eyes, what you're looking at, and so forth. So it's bringing in lots of information, and then based on that, it has algorithms for taking that sensor data, figuring out what the heck it means, and then turning that into actual events, interpreting what it means. This is one of the reasons why I really wanted Kristen to speak to us this afternoon so much, because what she specializes is in taking a video and having a computer figure out what's going on in that video. So for example, I could walk into this room, or any human could walk into this room and give a pretty good idea what's going on, just by analyzing, there are a bunch of humans here, there's some guys with cameras back there taking pictures, or somebody speaking, I mean, we could figure it out. A computer looking at a video has a tougher time figuring out what's going on, but that's what these things are all about. So I think video is going to be a key part of this.
Where are my pills?
Your pills are on the shelf in the kitchen. You have mail. Your message has been sent.
Hey Dad, this is my friend Dave.
Hi. This is Dave.
So you get the idea? So that's just one example. There's lots of others, of course, of cognitive assistance for any number of professions and life situations. Even helping me remember names, for example. There's cognitive assistance to do that, for example. Now, one thing we talk about robots and self-driving cars and cognitive assistance and so forth. The first thing that comes to my mind is, what about jobs? What's this going to do to employment? And the last year, especially after the election, this particular study has gotten a lot of attention. You hear this quote in the popular media quite a bit, and that is the estimate of how many jobs are at risk because of automation over the next 20 years. And these guys from Oxford University, Frey and Osborne, came up with the estimate using some pretty sophisticated statistical techniques that it would be about 47% of jobs in the U.S. Now, obviously, some of those are going to get replaced by other jobs, so you don't want to be too pessimistic about that. But if that's true, we're talking about a lot of disruption. If you think of the disruption we've seen by technology in the last 20 years, the last 30 years, let's put it that way, has been big. This is going to be really big. And it's higher in other countries like Japan or China than it is in the States. I've seen numbers as high as 65%. They found that it's typically the more routine jobs and less well-paid jobs are the ones that get hit the most, like driving trucks, for example, whereas the more creative, highly paid ones that require education are safer. And so a lot of the 53% are in jobs like we have. I'm not so sure they're right about that. I think the cognitive computing and AI could probably replace a lot of us too. It may be an assistant that makes us more efficient, but if you make an architect or a doctor or an accountant or a technology forecaster twice as efficient, it's not like there's going to be more architecture jobs, architecture things that need to be done, or more forecasts that need to be made. It'll just be, they can be made by half as many people. One of the great things I like by having Byron Reeves coming and speaking this afternoon, he has a very optimistic view of the picture of the future. Well, I look at this and I'm concerned for lots of reasons. This is sort of my last slide with the at Milan and in Santander, Spain. That's me back in the 80s when I was making all those great forecasts, writing the first wave. That's a wiser Larry from last year. And one of the things I did when I was in Italy was really think about what I do in my profession. You know, I bring in lots of information, I find patterns, I use data to make statistical forecasts, and I use that, and I try to communicate that to other people, I write reports. And I ask myself, well, how many of those things could I train a computer to do? And I came up with the conclusion most of it. So I think for all my wisdom that I've gathered over the years, I think my replacement can probably learn it and learn 10 times as much instead. I actually had a third talk I gave in Italy, or in Europe this summer, and it was actually in between the other two. I was actually staying above Lake Como in northern Italy, and I was invited by my host to speak to his high school seniors that were in an IT program in the city of Como. And so I did that. I gave a presentation a lot like the ones I give to you guys. Very well received. I did it in English. And I gave my list of technologies, and one guy asked me, well, why wasn't virtual reality up there? And I said, well, you know, I remember virtual reality from 10 years ago and didn't seem to go very far, and so I don't really see it being a big transitional thing, but I'll think about it. I decided to actually add it to the list of the important ones. So I think there will be a major forward for changing screen-based interfaces with our computers to more augmented reality and virtual reality. I'll get to that later. What does this all mean? One thing these trends I've talked about are all mutually reinforcing, I think. It means that we'll have rapidly increasing performance requirements. So just move all this to video and information. That requires rapidly improving technologies, which means massive and widespread investments. That means frequent upgrades and rapid obsolescence. So the life you guys have been living for the past 20 years is just going to be more so, more of the same. And then not especially apropos to us as professionals, but I think as citizens, we could have some really big employment disruptions over, you know, the next 20 years or so. We have to deal with one way or the other. Okay, well, thank you for listening, and I guess we'll turn the things over to Augie.